I've got no comment to make about that. I just rang up about this, and it's my experience.
No, you rang up about I believe you said a 6-year-old acceleration of people filming the police, Dan. So we can't have that conversation without mentioning George Floyd, obviously. In fact, you said, I believe it started in America. You actually said it started in America. So to say I only rang in to talk about this is just, I mean, you wouldn't get away with that in a courtroom, would you? Even with your notebook.
God, I'm so glad I'm not in the police anymore. Anyway, have a great day, and I'll speak to you soon.
Dan, mind how you go. Steve's in Maidstone. Steve, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Steve.
It's nice to be on the radio.
We'll see.
I just heard a few things you said. I used to be a policeman. I did it for 10 years, and then I left, and I own my own business now. But one of the things about the signs and stuff, not that I agree with the law or say it's not, but when I was taught in police college about the Public Order Act, it's to display or distribute a writing or sign or other visible representation which is threatening, abusive, or insulting, or likely to be.
Yeah.
So the point is, if you hold a sign up with a swear word or something like that, if the policeman decides or thinks that a person would be offended by or would be insulted or feel abused or harassed by it, then they can arrest you for it, which is not saying you're guilty, it's saying it's the beginning of an investigation to find out, interview your motives, and ultimately it would go to court, and they would then decide whether they agree or whether your reasonable defence that you had a just cause for it would be decided by the magistrate.
And most of the people that have, certainly in England, that have come to our attention in the last couple of days have subsequently been de-arrested. I'm not as familiar with the... I haven't heard
them de-arresting them for public order.
There was a guy called Simon yesterday. There was a guy... maybe, yes. We'll have to wait and see. This fella, in the end, wasn't arrested. My problem is that under that analysis, which I think you read, did you read that out, the Section 5 bit, or did you do it from memory?
No, every policeman knows that one.
Credit where it's due. The problem with that is twofold for me. It gives an incredible amount of power to individual officers, which may be necessary, it may not. But equally,
I don't think
at a gathering of Republicans, at a gathering of passionate Republicans, someone holding up a "Long Live the King" poster should, by rights, be arrested.
Oh, most certainly. Most certainly they would be covered too. They would be covered too because it's a sign that's shown amongst people who are likely to be insulted by it. Your purpose and the reason for it is to insult those people.
But where's the line between acceptable and unacceptable insult?
Well, that's the beauty of British law, really. I think because when you say it gives the police too much power, I don't think it does, because there's a misunderstanding of what the police's function is.
Right.
The police's job is to start an investigation, and an arrest. You have to say what your reasons for the arrests are. So you have a breach of the law, but you also have to then justify why it's necessary at that time to arrest the person. And often the necessity is for a prompt and effective investigation, or in order to protect that person or secure evidence going forward.
Yes.
So you start the investigation, but ultimately the police gather the evidence. They go to the CPS and say, is this enough to take it to court? And the CPS will say, no, it doesn't pass the threshold, let them go, refuse charge. Yes, this is in the public interest, this needs to go to court and go through due process in order to do it. And this person has raised a defence saying what they did, what their actions were necessary, and they felt that they haven't broken the law. It was a necessary thing to say.
This is a very helpful call, because what you're cautioning us against is taking these incidents in isolation rather than seeing them as part of a judicial or legal process.
The police are just starting an investigation. So any time a crime's reported, they have to investigate it. So they start the process. And just quickly,
go on quickly then, because we're out of time.
Sorry, really quick. With a breach of the peace, when you arrest someone for a breach of the peace, as soon as that breach of the peace has finished, a police officer has a legal obligation to let you go. The point of a breach of the peace is to stop it. And then as soon as the circumstances that gave rise to that breach of peace, i.e. you've walked the bloke away, he's no longer going to hurt.
He can't possibly cause a breach of the peace. So it's almost like a temporary arrest, a holding tactic.
Yeah, so normally you'd go to the...
hang on, I want to ask one more question and I'm already out of time. Okay, ready? So Mike has put this question in he's phrased it in a way I can't improve on. He goes, so if I offend a mob and they attack me, I get arrested.
No, because the mob anyone in the mob who's identified as attacking you has also committed a crime. It's not exclusive one or the other. It's where the police would investigate every crime that takes place.
Yeah, but they're not, are they? I mean, if this threat, again, don't talk about anything where arrests and charges have been brought, but no one's talking about anyone else getting arrested or charged in any of these encounters except the person who either made the protest or held up the sign. So, it's not your fault if the policing is imperfect.
No, I think that's an issue for the police, but
obviously, I do too.
You have to draw a line. Otherwise, there's a principle called de minimis. It means how small do you go? How many offences do you go? Do you investigate 1,000 offences at that thing? People who are littering, people who are spitting their chewing gum on the floor, dropping the fag end. There's a million different offences there. You have to pick your priorities. And if you've got one person in a silent crowd of people and one person who's screaming, you deal with the most obvious offence that's taken place, and then you mop up.
Yeah, no, I like it. The problem is, as with all of these conversations, that you're describing what should happen, whereas my bread and butter is largely regarding what has happened or what does happen, and they're rarely
do a really good job of it.
Thank you.
That's the wonderful thing about policing. We police by consent. Your criticism of the police, you're allowed to do it, and it's very vocal, and ultimately justice sits somewhere in the middle. And nobody's right all the time. It's extremely difficult to be perfect all the time, and the police aren't perfect.
You're telling me, Steve.
From my perspective, I was a copper. I did my best. I loved what I did, and I joined to help people. I really want to help people. I loved it, and I was so sad when I left. And I do feel bad when I see my colleagues put down. And there are some really nasty cops out there, and they're hated just as much by people like me as anyone else. No one likes a bully. But if you work at supermarket, if you work at Tesco's, there's going to be someone there who's horrible to the customers.
You're not wrong. And to the colleagues as well. Steve, I've got to crack on. I could listen to you all day, actually, which is a mark of how powerful your call was, because a couple of minutes ago I was getting frustrated that I couldn't get a word in. Actually, you made so many powerful points, so many helpful points as well. And again, I'm going to criticise police officers for impinging on freedom of speech. I'm never going to criticise them for the stuff that the right-wing newspapers pretend to get upset about, like doing reach-out work in a community outreach work, or daring to dance a bit when they're policing a carnival at which everybody is dancing. I'm never going to be one of those people who pretends that because you were at a gay pride march, you should instead have been out catching burglars. I mean, criticism of the police should be about the relationship between the population, the law, and the people charged with imposing the law or observing the law. It shouldn't really be. Well, anyway, that's my two penner. Thank you, Steve. I'll remember that call. It's 10 to 12. 11:52 is the time. Matthew makes a good point, actually. These former police officers justifying arrests of Republicans by saying that they're the start of the investigation are ridiculous, James. It can take 2 years even to get to court at the moment, so you'd have that hanging over you for years for an essentially peaceful protest. Listen, if we've learned anything over the last few years, it's that some of the things we thought everyone agreed on, actually not everyone does agree on. The idea of holding up a piece of paper saying "Not My King" on it being an arrestable offence enjoys a modicum of support, and indeed there are examples of it in this country over the last couple of days. Although the one we're discussing specifically did not involve anyone writing "Not My King" on a blank piece of paper. It involved a lawyer for, I believe, reasons of curiosity and concern. But I have to acknowledge that, one caller certainly thought it might have been reasons of mischief and goading, if you like, asking a police officer what would happen if I wrote "Not My King" on this piece of paper. And the police officer responded that you would be arrested. And I think that's wrong, obviously. Even when you bring in, and yesterday I think I fell for this bit, even then the argument about I'm arresting you for your own protection. Because if you're asking the police officer to utilise their own judgment on this, then you look around, and if you see that the sign is likely to cause violence, your attention surely is directed at the violent. I don't know. I mean, I'm never going to be a copper, that's for sure. 11:54 is the time. Mike's in Cheshire. Mike, what would you like to say?
Hi, morning, James. First of all, I'd like to say, I've disagreed a lot with you in the past.
What?
As,
Me?
For the right. Yeah, sorry,
what?
mate. But
Jeez.
relating to the B word, but we'll park that for now.
Good Lord. Well, you won that argument, Mike, didn't you? Look at that. I mean, everything's going brilliantly.
Or did we? Yeah. Well, I'll start off by saying I'm a royalist, okay? I like the royal family.
Yes.
In fact, I love them. I'm ex-military myself. I had the honour of meeting the Queen when I was younger.
Oh.
But last night, scrolling through Twitter and saw these arrests, threats of arrests, I had to double-check to make sure that these people were not standing outside the Kremlin. I think to criminalise somebody for their opinion is moronic and morally wrong. It's kind of like we're blinkering the establishment to say, no, look, all your subjects love you, everything's perfect. Sadly, nothing will change, that there'll be no improvement in the establishment if they don't know that there are some objections to how things are run. I think that's why we've got to some of the scandals we've had in the past, etc. It needs to be seen. People have got their right. We supposedly live in a free and democratic country, or the United Kingdom. Therefore, people should have the right to voice their opinions. And I've heard previous callers say, yes, they should maybe not do it then, it's inappropriate. My argument to that would be, if I had an objection to an establishment or something, I would want to do it when I would be seen the most. And for the police officers, they do a great job, 100%. I'm wholly in favour of the police. But then to say it's their subjective opinion...
Yeah, that is a bit weird, isn't it?
Your subjective opinion, whether somebody's broken the law, that just takes away everything that we stand on.
Well, no, I mean, it's always, in a way, it's always their subjective opinion, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, it could be argued it is, but it's a little bit more clear-cut. I mean, let's go to the other extreme.
Someone's holding a gun, and there's a bullet hole in the window. Then that subjective opinion is fairly well reliable.
Exactly, or two people fighting outside of a pub, swearing, effing and jeffing and whatnot, waking everybody up.
Yeah,
that I would say it's more objective, because if they ask you, I remember from law school, the average man on the omnibus, the Clapham omnibus.
Yes,
I think everybody would say yes, that's wrong. However, if we did a quick poll today and said, should you be arrested for holding a sign, I would love to see the results, because I don't think everybody in the country would say yes. Well, I'd hope not, because it sets a very, very dangerous precedent for our future.
I think you're right. I mean, you won't like my theory as to why the current government and the last government are apparently embarked upon a course to close down dissent and to help create a universe in which reality is increasingly squeezed out, because it would actually bring us back to the B word. But we'll do.
I think you'd be surprised, James. I think you'd be surprised that I probably would like to understand.
Okay.
And I'm kind of with you there. Over the last 3 years, this world, or our country, it seems that we've regressed back to the 1700s in some ways. It's really scary. I've got small children, and it scares me, to be honest.
No, well, there you go. Common ground is found, although I suspect we'd both rather that the ground didn't exist. Mike, there you go, Mike. Thank you, mate.
Yeah, take care.
Oh, cheers. I look forward to talking to you again as well. 11:58 is the time. Last word on this to Steve, I think, who's in Whitstable. Steve, what do you reckon? I've only got about 90 seconds left, so make them count.
I'm a police officer. I think it was the words the police officer used were probably wrong. I don't think I'd ever say you will be arrested. I said you may be arrested. Even if he commits the offence, that's up to me to arrest them. It might not be suitable. It might not come under Code G of PACE that I can do that. So we're getting hung up about some certain words that he used.
Yeah, I think
the
you're
other point I want to make is this is the lower end of the extreme of Section 5.
Yes.
But if that said something anti-Semitic...
Yes, of course.
We would be saying something different.
Yes, or Holocaust denial. I didn't interrupt the last, because I knew Mike would agree with me, but there are things you can say that you wouldn't just say it's just an opinion, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Of course not. And homophobia and other examples of hate, if you like, deliberately directed at a vulnerable group or a minority are going to that's going to be very different from. Well, actually, Steve, it's
not different though, because unless you're the one that is offended by it, you can't say that that's not an offence.
You can talk about immutable characteristics. No one's born a royalist, are they?
No, but that doesn't come into that Section 5. Section 5 is very, very loosely worded for exactly that reason.
To give you the room to manoeuvre.
You could be standing outside a vet's or something out shouting about animal rights, and it wouldn't offend me because I've got no interest in rabbits, but it offend a lot of other people, and that could cause Section 5 offence.
It's provocation, I suppose. Provocation is relevant as well, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's got a lot to do with what the police have said. I think had he said, "You may be arrested, sir," then
we probably wouldn't even be talking about it. There it is,
No.
the final word on this one. Thank you, Steve. It's 12 noon. And you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC as we approach the news headlines. I'm not quite sure what to do in the next hour. I'm always open to suggestions. I am very much drawn to... there's a difference between the things I pick at 12 o'clock and the things I pick at 10 o'clock. At 10 o'clock, I just generally got a little bit more energy. And I'm interested in looking at Liz Truss's claim that her policies designed, by her own admission, to provide a lot more help to rich people than to poor people are, in her own words, fair. Do you think that's fair? Yes, I do. There's a cost of living crisis. I've come up with a policy that is going to be of more benefit to people who don't need help than it is to people who do need help, and the current Prime Minister thinks it's fair. But I am interested also in people who just aren't working anymore. 5 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think we'll return to the Resolution Foundation's findings that the rich are to get twice as much cost of living support than the poor tomorrow. I want to have a proper run-in at that one. It's a companion piece, isn't it, to Liz Truss's claim that it's perfectly fair that I'm going to get more help than someone who's already using a food bank under her cost of living proposals. But I've been looking at this for a while now, and I just find it fascinating. The UK unemployment is at its lowest rate for 48 years, which would ordinarily be good news. It isn't unalloyed good news because the number of job vacancies is still at an all-time high. Although, not an all-time high, it's come down a little bit since June, but the phrase you'd use is historically high. It's still historically high. It's come down from the highest it's ever been to about 34,000 below the highest it has ever been. One of the strangest things about journalism is that it addresses many, many issues about which nobody knows anything for sure. But you kind of can't ever admit that. You know, I was talking about it with regard to the royal family in the first hour of the programme. You see people pop up on your television screens, even on your radios, who are described as royal experts or royal authors. They're not. And good luck to them. We've all got to earn a crust. We've all, our kids need shoes. But very, very few of them will actually have, unless you're right in the core and you're going on the trips, and then you get 5 minutes with one of them, or you may get a sit down. But there's not a great deal of insight that you couldn't get just from watching the telly, to be honest with you. The idea that there are loads of courtiers selling titbits to the papers or things like that may have had some currency once, but they're not. Most of them, the massive majority of them, unless they're actually on the staff of a national newspaper or broadcaster and have access to the royal tours, they're just seagulls, as Eric Cantona would put it, following the trawler and, picking up next to nothing, but getting paid simply for being there by various broadcasters, especially American broadcasters. And I mention that because in the context of employment, nobody knows what's going to happen next. People make money by gambling on the movements of markets and indeed some movements of populations. I mean, not where they live, but what they do. There are still very large numbers of vacancies, still an awful lot of job advertisements. And this fellow who runs the recruitment business, James Reed, I mention it because he's refreshingly honest. He says the question is, what happens next? Will there be a job slump? That's a concern, clearly, but our data at the moment doesn't suggest that because we've still got a large number of vacancies and a lot of employers are still struggling to recruit. So it seems to me, and obviously I'm no expert, it seems to me that we're in an unprecedented period. There's a sort of combination of bizarre circumstances that have created a jobs market that nobody really understands, or certainly nobody understands enough to make predictions about. The abolition of freedom of movement was obviously a ridiculous thing to do. Absolutely ridiculous, but it's happened and its consequences have become clear. It hasn't affected a particular decrease in immigration. Another thing I don't understand is why the job vacancies remain so high when the number of people coming here from non-EU countries has rocketed. All of those poor fellas who used to ring me up to say they were voting Brexit because there were too many brown faces in Tesco's are going to be absolutely gutted when they start reading about the immigration levels coming from countries where people actually are brown, as opposed to, France or Poland, where some people are, but the massive majority, of course, are not. And listen, when the Daily Mail gets around to telling you to get upset about this stuff, the public concern about immigration will go up again. It's a nice, healthy, low level now because the newspapers aren't whipping you up into hatred and fury and confusion every day. When they start doing that again, which they will inevitably do at some point, then so public opinion will change as well. But it's only part of the story. COVID has been huge as well. Coming out of coronavirus, coming out of lockdown, and deciding, I think this is a constituency worthy of conversation, but it's entirely speculative on my part. Coming out of lockdown and deciding you don't want to work anymore. Or certainly you don't want to do what you did before. This has happened to a lot of people. And I'm 50, which I think puts me in the category of people who didn't join the workforce pensioned up to the eyeballs, if you see what I mean. My dad's generation, pensions were kind of taken for granted. You would have one. Your employer would provide one. There would be, but just I don't know what the detail is. I didn't follow events closely enough, but the idea of retiring early or cutting back, doing less, I think is going to be almost impossible for the generations that can't afford to buy homes. But for the people around my age or older, who would be the people now approaching a point of considering retirement, a form of retirement, a winding down. I always think, regular listeners will know at this point, I generally remind you of my second favourite ever piece of graffiti, which was on the motor on the M40 coming in, I think, from Oxford, across the sign to the left-hand side of the motorway if you were heading towards London. And I only ever saw it when, we were going back to Kiddie for Sunday lunch or something like that. I never actually saw it as a commuter, but it was obviously aimed at commuters. And it simply said, across a long, long fence, why do I still do this every day? And I suspect a lot of people have come out of lockdown and come out of coronavirus, maybe suffered a bereavement, maybe had a bit of a rethink about stuff, and they've thought to themselves, why do I still do this every day? So that will be part of it as well. And then there'll be other reorderings, there'll be other reprioritizations. But I can tell you, the numbers suggest that there is an increase in the number of people who are described as inactive. The number of people who are no longer looking for work has gone up, and it's not counted in the employment figures. It's one of the reasons why there's been a fall in the unemployment rate, because you only qualify for unemployment benefits and you are only counted as unemployed if you are actively looking for work. You are countable, if you like. The inactivity rate has risen to 21.7, which is the highest it's been in at least 5 years. And then you've got this thing called quiet quitting that I'd like to talk about as well. I don't think I would be able to quiet quit in this job. I think it would be a fairly swift journey to the job centre for me if I decided to quiet quit. Because quiet quitting essentially involves doing just enough in the office to keep up. You will not be checking your messages on the way home. You will not be doing emails at the... Actually, maybe I've already quiet quit. I mean, I put in, as you know, an incredibly hard-working shift between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. every day. But the rest of the time, do whatever. I twiddling my thumbs, go catch a movie. I'm quite fond of catching boats at the moment. I like to catch river boats up and down the Thames. The weather's turning now, so I'll stop doing that. But quiet quitting for me would involve doing the bare minimum at work. And I couldn't get away with that. I can't turn down my energy levels because you'll turn down your radio. That's the way it goes. That's the way it works. Start putting my feet up on the desk and play some records, old Alid and Alexander Armstrong, they play some records. Sometimes they can last 9, 10, 11, 12 minutes over at Classic FM, which I walk past every day. Imagine what that would be like. You could run a minicab firm from a Classic FM studio just for the bits where the music was playing. There's also a noticeable fall in job satisfaction. Listen, I don't want to overcomplicate this. There's two very different things here. Dan in Chester has fallen for has bitten the hook, bitten the worm. He says, what is your favourite ever piece of graffiti? Well, Dan in Chester, it's funny you should ask me that. My favourite ever bit of graffiti was on a housing estate in Hume in 1990-91. And bizarrely, someone tweeted a picture of a companion piece to it the other day on Twitter, the British Cultural Archives, which is a wonderful website. And it was the first Gulf War, and it simply said, across one of those walkways that links the tower blocks, it simply said, if Kuwait grew carrots, ? I don't know, I was a kid, wet behind the ears, fresh out of school. I just thought that was brilliant. So that's my favourite ever piece of graffiti. Do not ring me with your favourite pieces. I mean this. Do not ring me with your favourite pieces of graffiti. I want to speak to you if you are in one of two categories. If you have either completely, in the last couple of years, completely, to your own surprise, this is the crucial point, to your own surprise. There's no point ringing me if you're doing something that you've been planning on doing for 20 or 30 years. I can tell you, my friend and former colleague Eddie Mayer, when he decided to retire early, it certainly wasn't something he had planned before lockdowns began. It was something that occurred to him. I think he's spoken about this, something that occurred to him during lockdown, and that idea of just completely redrawing the plan for the rest of your life. It absolutely fascinates me. I don't know why. I always find transformation among the most interesting things we can talk about on the radio, the idea of doing something that takes you by surprise. So if you're in that category, if you have come out of lockdown, it doesn't have to be coronavirus or lockdown, but something's happened in the last, let's say, 3 or 4 years that has made you redraw your plans for the future. Not illness, forgive me, I don't want to sound insensitive or crass, but it's not about having a rethink that's been imposed upon you almost by medical matters. It's about your relationship with the world, and it's changed. And I'd love to talk to you about that. And how big a part of it do you think is this rise in the number of inactive people who are not working or before retirement age, people who are not working or indeed looking for work? If you're in that category and you're quite surprised to find yourself there, give us a call. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And then quiet quitters. I don't know if anyone's going to own up to this, though. That's the problem I've got. So quiet quitters are people who have consciously or caught themselves just turning down the dial of effort. Partly because you don't feel appreciated by your boss, partly because your job satisfaction has diminished, partly perhaps because you're looking at the world and you're thinking to yourself, why do I still do this every day? Answer is, I have to. But you're just dialing it down. So you're not checking your phone on the way home, you're not doing emails at the weekend, you're not catching up on work, except when the clock is ticking, when you're on the meter. I think everyone should be a little bit more like that. I really do. I don't like it when it's really excessive. Sometimes you've got to help a colleague out or something like that. But I do think that in this country in particular, we've bent over backwards to accommodate employers when, since as the trade union movement declines, you don't get much in return. It's often very one-way traffic. 12:17 is the time. So I want to speak to you if you are a quiet quitter, which means you're still doing the job, but you're avoiding the above and beyond, the hustle culture mentality, or what psychologists call occupational citizenship behaviours. So you're doing stuff essentially that you don't get paid for because you're hoping that it might, accrue credit in other areas. It generally doesn't, by the way. Or you've knocked it on the head. I just want to know why. Talk me through the process. 12:17 is the time. Don't shoot the messenger, honestly. Quiet quitting is the phrase that has been applied to the process that we're describing in recent months, but quite a few of you pointing out that there are other things you could call it. Most obviously, perhaps, working to rule, or even just working. Acting your wage is quite a good phrase as well. The idea that I'm only going to do work when I'm actually getting paid for it. I like this. This isn't appropriate for LBC necessarily, but the phrase you're looking for is phoning it in. I don't think it is, actually, because when the clock is ticking, you could give it your all. But when you're not on the meter, you're not doing anything. So there's several different nuances here, isn't there? There's literally getting away with doing the bare minimum while you're at work. That's what phoning it in is. Or working pretty hard for the 9 to 5, but at 5:01, boom, it's gone. And I bet you that you're now thinking of someone you used to work with who was like that. And you're thinking of them in quite a negative way. I wonder whether they had it right all along. Because how much, when you think that you're accruing brownie points with the boss by going above and beyond and by coming in at weekends or doing the shift that no one else wants to do, you think that somehow when promotions come around, you'll get preferred, or when redundancies come around, you'll get ignored. I don't think it works like that. Maybe I'm wrong. I haven't had a normal job for a very long time. Mark's in Slough. Mark, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, hi, James.
Hello, Mark.
First-time caller, but yeah, kind of in that situation, actually. I was a primary school teacher, and just that workload just was overbearing, really, I think, and my wife works in the NHS.
Yeah.
And then we came to this sort of decision that we don't retire officially or get a pension for another year.
Right.
But I'd seen this trip about 9 years ago in the back of the paper, and I'd kept it by the side of the bed, and suddenly thought, come on, let's just do it. Let's just finish work. Well, I'm going to finish work. My wife's going to get like 2 months unpaid leave, and just go on this trip. What with all that's been happening, and you never know what's around the corner, and time just goes, just disappears. And
was there a clincher? Was there a moment that pushed you? Because it's been by the bed for years. Why has it suddenly become more relevant now?
I don't know. I think my wife was a bit reticent, I think, initially, because it's a trip to Antarctica.
Okay.
And it's sort of a bit of and she's a marathon runner, and she's down to do the Chicago Marathon, and she just sort of said, well, let's just go and not come back. Let's just go and then add this on. And so I think with the pressure of work, and it's interesting what you said earlier, this bit about dipping in, the workload, I used to work 4 days a week, but I had to work on my day off just to keep up with the work and not be paid for that. And that's in primary school teaching.
Yeah. Which isn't fair, is it, really? I mean, in the great scheme of things, you wouldn't have signed up to a 4-day week if you'd known you were going to have to work 5.
It was just the amount of work.
No, I understand.
It seems to get increasing, and we think, we're thinking, well, can we manage as well, like financially, the gap between, because we're in that 66 age when we can get a state pension.
Right.
And, we're kind of lucky in a way, and
Well, not just in a way. Compared to later generations, you are lucky. So you crunched the numbers, did you, and just thought, do you know what, we can do it. Sack it, I'm out of here.
But again, it's still like you said, to do this, I'm going to go back and do some supply work, just because you can't just afford to stop. And there's obviously a lot of supply work for teaching because of the teacher situation out there. The drop-in numbers of people coming in, young people leaving, at a certain age because the workload's too much. It's just so it's kind of a market for me to go back and that. So you won't then count as inactive. You'll just be a lot less active than you were before, or a bit less active than you were before. And I guess with the supply teaching, you're dipping in and dipping out again. You don't have that constant pressure, that constant stress of the grindstone. I think it's happening a lot, somewhat worryingly. I think my next caller, thank you, Mark, from Mark to Mary. I think you are a primary school teacher as well, or you were, which is not. Luckily, Jonathan Gullis has now been made an education minister, so obviously the world of education is about to be immeasurably improved in every imaginable way. Mary, what would you like to say?
Well, I like to think of myself as a recovering primary school teacher.
Gosh.
Because it's toxic. I didn't quite hear everything your previous caller said, but the workload is crazy, and I think the most frustrating thing is that the workload that you have isn't about the children. It's about Ofsted, or it's about, kind of like the outward kind of show of the school, that kind of satisfies the kind of the leadership team of the school. And the children almost are an afterthought, and it really sucks your soul from your whole being. You get into school at 7, you leave at 6, you still have work to do, and it's crazy workloads, and it just really does. It's so detrimental to your well-being. So I actually left at Christmas before lockdown, and then I was doing supply, and it was fantastic. I really enjoyed, kind of walking in, teaching, and really enjoying the children and enjoying teaching, and then walking away at 4 o'clock and not having any of the extra stress and pressure. But during lockdown, I was going slowly mad, and my friend said, well, why don't you offer some online teaching? So I put an ad on a local Facebook group and offered half an hour, pay what you can, and out of that grew my business. Nice. I'm now an online tutor. And I'm loving what I do. It's all about the children. It's all about them and the pace and what they need to learn and just to be stretched and challenged. It's not about anything else. And I can do what I see fit for the children, not what someone who's not in my classroom day to day, or what Ofsted or the government or whoever feels is fit for the children of this country, which we all know is very damaging because there's so many teachers leaving the profession.
What is the difference between being a supply teacher? I understand that you're doing something different now, but what's the difference between being a supply teacher and being a normal teacher in terms of workload? And I can immediately imagine what some of the differences are, but from a pupil's point of view, well, just answer the question, actually. I don't need to add a supplementary. Why is it so much easier to do?
So as a classroom teacher, you are responsible for the planning and the preparation and the assessment of the children within your classroom. And you have an amazing amount of pressure to get these children, to kind of almost unattainable goals. They have to make this much progress every term. And, when you're teaching in an area where children are coming in hungry, or, there's a lot of deprivation and they may have seen, kind of awful things at home, or they're coming in and they're not well dressed.
Oh, I see.
Lots of, all of this, you're battling that even before you can kind of, teach them, kind of long division. So there's that kind of pressure. Yeah. Then there's other kind of elements of pressure about extra workload in terms of being having this kind of enormous pressure about being responsible for a subject. Because if Ofsted walk in, they need to know exactly how the school teaches history and the progression through the years and all kinds of kind of more technical stuff. So that's another extra kind of workload that you have. Plus, you have. Well, there's just everything else. You have parent meetings. You have, all of the marking, and marking is ridiculous. It's not just ticks on a page and 10 out of 10. It's, you have to almost write a paragraph for every child.
What's that? So a lot of people have a kind of, I have to do this. There is no alternative. That's how you get through the day sometimes. What was it that made you realise, actually, it doesn't have to be like this. I can do things differently.
Well, initially I didn't have that thought when I'm sure. Gave in my resignation. I was told that I couldn't reteach a lesson that my children struggled to understand this particular concept, and I was told I had to keep going. And my argument was, if I keep going, they're not going to understand the next concept. There's going to be a big hole in their understanding, and it's going to be really detrimental. And I was told, you need to carry on, and that was it. It wasn't about the children; it was about other things. It was about keeping up with the curriculum and the planning. And the children were the second thought.
Oh, this is quite depressing, isn't it? It's very depressing to hear this.
It was incredibly.
It's a coincidence that the first two callers have been soon to be either recovering or soon to be recovering primary school teachers. But, and just to give a quick shout out, Mary, to all the idiots shouting, "But holidays!" at the radio, because we won't be taking any calls from them, I can assure you. But
you know what? If you think the teachers' holidays are great, you go into the classroom, you be a teacher, and you enjoy those holidays.
Most of these people can't read and write, Mary. They just spend their days shouting at the radio. They wouldn't necessarily be an augmentation to the to the teaching profession. I like that, and you sound. I imagine if I'd spoken to you a couple of years ago, you would have sounded a lot less at one with the universe than you sound today.
Oh, I'm much, much happier.
You have it. It's contagious, I think. Calmness is contagious. Thank you, Mary. 12:30 is the time. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. 12:32 is the time. A quick word on events in Northern Ireland this afternoon. The new king and his queen consort clearly decided to press the flesh, as it were, to get in front of the public and to do as much walking about, or indeed as many walkabouts as possible, something which the public in Northern Ireland seem very appreciative of. It's always hard to get a full picture from television cameras, but big crowds, deep crowds, dozens deep, come out today near Hillsborough Castle, as you hear, to see the new king, to express their condolences and indeed to make some floral tributes as well. And the commentary upon it is upbeat again, as we picked up from some of our colleagues at Balmoral and at Buckingham Palace and at Windsor. Right at the end of last week, at the beginning of this week, the combination of mourning and celebration of the new king is quite telling, even touching. That summarised, in fact, encapsulated in that phrase that many people weren't familiar with, I discovered when I shared it with you earlier this week, is that traditionally that you say, long, the Queen is dead, long live the King. You move immediately from commemoration and commiseration to celebration of the new monarch, and that's unfolding in Northern Ireland now as we speak. Theo Ashwood has joined us
to bring you news of dates when Parliament may be sitting again so that we can hear crucial legislation. Of course, there's been a huge amount of consternation, frustration that when it comes to the energy price guarantee, we still don't know how the government's going to actually pay for it, borrowing, whether they've factored in any reduction in inflation, actually helping to pay back that money. But we do have, we think, a date for an emergency budget when we will get some of the finer details. And that is September the 23rd, the Friday, September the 23rd. It's a day longer than Parliament was sitting next week. Of course, Parliament won't be sitting on the Monday the 19th because it's the state funeral for Queen Elizabeth II. Lib Dem conference has been cancelled. And then, of course, Prime Minister Liz Truss was due to fly to the United Nations General Assembly in New York. But we understand that it's looking like we should have an emergency budget on the Friday the 23rd. Moving ahead, there is a huge amount of legislation to get through still. And this week, obviously, Parliament can't sit because it's a period of national mourning. But we understand that the government's now looking at basically recalling Parliament early. Parliament wasn't due to sit until October the 17th, that's the Monday. It could come back, now we understand, around the 10th, a week earlier. And there may be some overlap with the Scottish National Party's conference in Aberdeen. Of course, the week before, we have the Conservative conference, and the week before that, the Labour conference, both are due to be curtailed to ensure that there aren't too many celebrations, partying, or out-of-hand fringe events or speeches on the floor of each of the conference venues. So that's basically the changes are designed, James, to ensure we get the emergency budget before the energy price guarantee comes in October the 1st. That's necessary because that's when energy prices go up. And then, of course, to ensure that the government can keep its programme on track now that Liz Truss has taken over.
OK, I think I'm clear on all of that. Splendid. The pared down conferences will look like what? So
I think often party conferences can be quite celebratory.
Yes.
I'm sure the Conservative conference, there would have been, I should say, lots of celebrations for the Liz Truss supporters, those groups that have backed Liz Truss up until now. You might expect plenty of wine to be served at certain fringe events. But from what we understand, I think actually this conference season is going to be much more withdrawn, if that's the right word. It's going to be pared back. It's not.
It'll be interesting to see how it unfolds. And there's no major business to be done, is there? The Conservatives have got a new leader. Liz Truss will be looking to make a good impression. In some ways, the fact that her oratorical skills are not fantastic, this will help her. There won't be a sense of pomp and occasion in the way that there would have been ordinarily.
You usually get a feeling when you go into a party conference of where either Labour or the Tories, Lib Dems or SNP are at a particular time, and you would expect for a conference season this year, given what we've had over the summer, for the Tories to be, or a certain part of the Conservative Party to be in quite find voice, given Liz Truss's victory at the beginning. It was only a week ago. But I think actually where we find ourselves now, and what each of the political parties will want to project, we won't find that conference season it's not a normal year. It's much more drawn.
What would happen if you did a bit of quiet quitting? Would LBC would grind to a halt, wouldn't it?
No,
I think it would.
Quiet.
I think it will. Well, you are very much someone who goes above and beyond the call of duty in pursuit of your, quitting your professional duties. I think we can all agree about that. Some of the shifts you've put in have been superhuman in recent years.
Yes, Brexit was full on, James. Thank you. It's a really difficult one, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
I've got friends and people do all sorts of different things, and they take a different approach. And I don't know if there's a right balance, but there's certainly a balance to be struck.
Good luck. There you are. Should many thanks indeed. 12:38 is the time. Steve's in Streatham to steer us back to this notion of not going the extra mile because you've kind of realised no one ever thanks you when you do, or actually knocking it on the head altogether, becoming part of the growing number of people who are neither in work nor looking for work because you've done the calculations, you've done the sums, you've crunched the numbers, you've had a little look at the road ahead and you've thought, you know what? Possibly as a consequence of lockdowns and coronavirus, you've thought, actually, I don't have to carry on like this until retirement or until the lights go out. I could lead a completely different life. I think the rest of us who are still stuck on rails find that quite inspiring. I suppose it depends on your character. It's either enviable or inspiring or a little bit of both. I find it mostly inspiring, I think. Steve's in Streatham. Steve, what would you like to say?
I'm a first-time caller.
Hello, Steve.
And I'm very, very nervous.
Well, why did you leave it so long? You know what? You should have come in years ago, Steve, and then you'd be a regular by now.
Let me explain. I'm driving a vehicle that doesn't belong to me, and LBC is on, and I heard what you said.
Yes.
And it just struck such a note for me, right? I have to say, I work for seriously rich people.
Okay.
And what I want to say to you is, today's favour is tomorrow's duty.
Oh, that's a phrase. Is that your own?
Right. Yeah, well, I don't know.
I've not heard that before. If I were you, I'd claim it now.
Okay, right. Well, look, what I mean is, whereas before, if I was given something to do, I would take it from start to finish.
Yes.
Right, whatever it might be. But now, in the last, as I was telling the lady I was talking to earlier, in the last couple of months, I have got the impression that I should be grateful that I have my job still.
Yeah.
And whereas now I would never stop on a journey, I've stopped and I'm talking to you.
What? Well, you haven't got anyone in the back of the car at the moment, have you?
No, I wouldn't dream of doing that.
That would be quite amusing.
No. Could you imagine being tapped on the shoulder? Are you ordering my coffee? No.
What changed, Steve? What do you think changed? Because, I mean, you're describing the I love that phrase, today's favour is tomorrow's duty. I don't think that needs any expansion or explanation. But what changed? What shifted?
Well, I just think they think I should be grateful.
Just for being there at all?
Yes, being given a job.
Yeah.
Still having a job. And, I don't know what else to say now. I feel... I'm wondering what the moment of realisation was or what it was like. I mean, maybe there wasn't one because you're tootling along quite merrily and you're doing the extra bits and bobs, you're doing the favours. And then suddenly you sort of think, do you know what? You don't appreciate it. Why do I bother? Well, they don't appreciate it, no. But I mean, I've known that for years. But I mean, maybe I think, is it worth it?
There's the question. Right, okay. How was that for you?
Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. I'm adding that phrase to my list of overused phrases. Today's favour is tomorrow's duty. Okay. Do you reckon you'll be ringing me again, or is that it now? Have we peaked?
I don't know, but I normally listen to Talk Sport, but
what? Never heard of it. Never heard of it.
It was such. I can't believe that I was in this car at that time listening to that conversation.
And there it was.
I've got to add to it.
You felt seen.
Okay, I felt I just got to add to it.
Well, I'm glad you did, because that was absolutely on the money. And that phrase, in many ways, today's favour is tomorrow's duty, sums up exactly what I spent about 14 minutes trying to articulate in my own long-winded, verbose way. Steve, I shall work doubly hard for the rest of this shift to keep you locked to LBC, because if you're enjoying this programme, wait until you meet Sheila Fogarty. Seriously. Take care, mate. I'm sorry to hear that as well. There is a sort of poignancy to the idea that you suddenly realise that doing the extra bits and bobs aren't actually appreciated. It's not transactional either necessarily. It shouldn't just be to accrue brownie points or credits in other areas. Just appreciation. But then to come across the idea that you come out of it just being taken for granted. Nicola's an actor. Nicola, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm very well. What's on your mind?
So I have gone from being a quiet quitter to an actual quitter in the last 10 days.
Oh, blimey. You're on the money.
So I've been in my current role for 3 years. Really, really love the role. I'm a commercial manager with a technology company. And within the first 18 months of the role, I was getting great reviews and all of that stuff. And then, of course, we had the pandemic. And what happens with us is we lost quite a number of staff during the pandemic for various reasons. There was some, cost cutting, and also people were poached by other companies. And so I guess since we've come back to, the normal that we're at now, it has just been expected that those of us who've been left with the company kind of pick up the slack.
Okay. Oh, this is an interesting consequence of the vacancies rocketing then. So they can't find replacements for the people that have left, which means the people still there are being lent on quite hard.
Yeah, so the work still has to get done, and they are recruiting, to be fair. So they haven't taken for granted that people will be able to keep with the
they're struggling to recruit.
workload.
They're trying to recruit, but they're struggling.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. So recruiting, training, all of that takes time. So I kind of noticed, I guess, in the last 6 months in particular, the extras that I was doing where, as Steve put it more eloquently than me, the more you do, the more they expect, and so it becomes the norm rather than actually getting any recognition for it. And it kind of got to the point where it was kind of starting to demotivate me to the point where it was starting to affect my mental health.
Gosh.
So I had, some conversations with my partner. Obviously, we did some sums, and I resigned. Now, I have a 3-month notice period.
Right.
So I'll be paid till the end of November. And your producer asked me what I'm going to do next.
She's very nosy. She's very nosy. I can only apologise for that, Nicola.
She's perfectly entitled to.
You should have said, none of your beeswax. None of your business. What are you going to do next?
Job hunt is basically what I'm going to do next. So, I guess you could call it crazy coming into a recession, having left a job with no other job to go to.
Not if it's hurting you. Not if it's damaging you.
After very kind of careful and long consideration.
There it is.
It's the best thing. And I don't think I'll be the only one, by the way, not even just within the type of work that I do. But
I'm sure. Could you have had conversations? Did you speak to bosses and say this can't go on or I need to...
I absolutely did, but when I sent my resignation letter the week before last, it still came as a massive shock.
Right.
Which came as a massive shock to me, actually, given the fact I'd have these conversations, and I thought maybe it might have been on their radar, but
no, because they're thinking, and I wonder how big a part of this is. This is the sort of the counterpoint, isn't it? Is employers and bosses thinking that old attitude of, well, if you don't like it, there's someone else who'll do the job. At this point in our economic cycle, there generally isn't. But they're still hanging on to the idea that, well, they're hardly going to walk away, are they? How's she going to pay her bills if she walks? But you've reached breaking point, and I think you've done the right thing. I've
always been the kind of steady Eddie as well. So
right.
I think I've been kind of reliable, and funnily enough, I did meet with my boss face to face. He's in a different country a few weeks ago,
right?
And his first question to me was he's concerned about somebody else on the team leaving.
Not you.
Not me. No, I definitely wasn't on his radar.
So you're almost getting penalised for being the one who is steady Eddie, as you say it. You're almost getting... It's a bit like when you say, can I have a pay rise? And you've given one to them over there, and they say, well, they were about to leave. And you say, well, I wasn't. I just deserve a pay rise. It's like, why am I not getting rewarded for being committed and for being loyal rather than for threatening to walk away? It's that kind of mentality, isn't it, that we're sometimes on the wrong end of. I love that. Good luck, Nicola.
Thank you very much.
I'm sure you'll be grand.
I hope so, thank you.
12:47 is the time. 10 to 1 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we're examining two phenomena. One so-called quiet quitting, or working to rule, as it would be called in the context of industrial action. Remarkable, really. One of the elements of the railway disputes, the industrial action that has been called off in respect of the Queen's passing, but is not over. Some of the disruption was reportedly caused by drivers declining to do overtime, actually just working according to their contracted hours, which gives you a sort of indication of how reliant employers are on whatever the opposite of working to rule is, going above and beyond. And admittedly, you're paid for it when you're driving a train. I think a lot of people listening to this have probably put in extra hours that they're not paid for. Can you think of anything worse than going through the motions for 6 to 8 hours every day, waiting to clock off, says Peter? If you don't like your job or who you work for, the answer is simple. Just leave. If you're a good worker of any description, you will get a job you like. If not, it's probably your fault. Most employers look after good staff. It's in their interest. I think you've had some very lucky experiences there, Peter, and the wherewithal, both financial and possibly mental, that's needed to walk away from the job that pays your wages and pays your bills is not something that I would personally describe in such simplistic and facile terms. But I'm glad things have worked out well for you. I, however, am built differently. I completely understand people who know that they'd be much happier doing something else, but continue to do what they do because they're frightened of leaping into the unknown, as it were. Keith, put your hand down. Well, actually, I don't know why I'm giving out the phone number. I'm not going to get through all the calls I've got waiting, so I should get to them sooner rather than later. Simon's in Kensal Rise. Simon, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello, James.
Hello.
It was just the sort of a conflict sort of within myself, really, that I. Just to go back to your bit of graffiti, I pass that graffiti every time I go out to visit my mum. She lives out at Beaconsfield, and during that period when that piece of graffiti was up, I was absolutely rinsing every sort of ounce out of myself, working in the ad industry, and flying off to meetings here, there, and everywhere, and working stupidly long hours.
But also, in a sense, loving it. I mean.
Oh yes, absolutely loving it. Absolutely loving it. Not in any way doing that quiet quitting thing. But
sure.
In fact, the longer I stayed in the business, the more intense it got. But eventually, and it's a conversation for another time, because I was on the creative side.
Right.
But when I got to 52, I was sort of told my services were no longer required, and that happened to quite a few creative people.
Brutal industry,
in
isn't
their
it?
50s.
Yeah.
But anyway, But so why I've managed to kind of keep going, doing a kind of consultancy version of the same thing. Yeah. But what I'm saying to a researcher is that actually, if I do crunch the numbers, and I'm not very good at maths, but it's not that difficult.
That's why you were a creative.
I could not work anymore.
Right.
And the idea appeals to me massively, because I wouldn't have any problem at all filling my day with all sorts of useful things.
Yes.
But I'm from a very working class background. Sort of grew up on a council estate with a single parent,
right.
and I just wonder whether what's not letting me do that is that kind of thing that's deeply ingrained from born in 1964 on a council estate. That what gives me the right to think that I can retire at 50. I'm 58 in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah.
And who the hell do I think I am, sort of thing. Which is just an interesting.
God, that's fascinating, isn't it? Sort of know your place mentality almost, and the work. The hamster wheel is where you belong. That's what you should be doing.
Yeah. Yeah, keep your nose to the grindstone, it's definitely there because, as I say, that idea of just calling it a day and saying, well, you don't really want to work.
You said, just so you know, you said, pardon my expression. I couldn't pardon the expression that you used, so I had to dump the last 10 seconds of what you said, just in case any listeners 5 seconds, forgive me, any listeners are confused. So we shall say you couldn't waste the money. you wouldn't be able to waste money, but you could get by, and it just, something holds you back, something in your... Well, it might not be your background. Martin Amis used to talk about something called tramp angst, that he had and Julian Barnes didn't have when they were big mates. I may have got the authors the wrong way around.
What was the expression again?
Tramp angst. So however much you've got, you have however much you've got, somewhere in the back of your mind, you think you could lose it all tomorrow and end up sleeping on a bench. Whereas some people who've got less than you would actually be able to think, actually, do you know what? We do this and we do that, and we could actually call it a day now and just, take it easy for the rest of our lives.
I've never heard that expression. Thanks. But I've heard it. I've heard people talk around that subject before of it could all just end tomorrow, like very talented people have it, don't they? Yeah.
I hope so. I'll take that. I'll take that analysis of it because I've got it too. Well, hey, it's a work in progress. Think on, because you never know. 60 might be a big one for you.
Yeah.
You might, as the big 6-0 approaches, you might give it a bit of a revision. But there it is. I shall ask you in the morning, why do you still do this every day?
All right. Cheers, mate.
Cheers, Simon. Take care. 12:56. Rachel's in Salford. Last word on this, and it's another teacher.
Hello.
Hello, Rachel. What would you like to say?
Yeah, sorry. I know it's a bit boring today, all these teachers.
It's not boring at all. It's absolutely riveting because it speaks of an existential crisis in the profession. So thank God Jonathan Gullis is an education minister now. We're all going to be absolutely fine. Carry on.
Yeah, of course. We're all saved, aren't we? So what really sort of compelled me to ring was the fact that I couldn't quite quit. So I had no choice but to quit. I think in teaching, you don't have the option of just, you do, but the kids hate you. You don't deliver good lessons. You don't get any progress, and you're not having a good time. And I think
so. Your pride wouldn't let you do it. Some colleagues probably can,
not, because you're standing up there looking like a lemon. If you're not teaching properly, if you're not prepared, then you're letting the kids down, and we're not in it for that. And I think, as your previous callers have said, you do more because you do it for the children. But obviously, things have tightened so much in the past few years in education, as with everything else.
Yes.
And your employers are desperate. You know they're desperate. You'll give as much as you can. There's loads of supply in schools. So I stopped working just over 12 months ago, like at sort of the end of the real kind of COVID impact in schools, I suppose. And there was supply everywhere. So you were picking up classes that had just come from supply teachers. It's extra chaos. Your expectations are still the same in terms of what's expected of you. You're just working doubly hard. And I suppose COVID really made me reconsider my role, simply because I'd spent time with my daughter, who was 3 at the time, and I'd missed out the first 2 years of her life doing 12-hour days teaching.
And it wouldn't have crossed your mind otherwise?
I didn't. Do you know what? My husband said it to me, and I said, no, we can't do that. I've got to teach. I can't not work. So I'm 31. And the idea of not working, I've taught since I was 21, it was just ludicrous. And he was like, we've got to make it work. We need to find a way of making it work. We can't lose this. Yeah, and I think he'd had a good few breaks during COVID. He's a head engineer in food manufacturing. So
of course.
That was obviously...
And how's it working out for you? It doesn't sound like there's any regrets.
I miss it loads. I'm going to do some cover teaching a couple of days a week just to sort of... I get bored. I love people. So being at home and playing housewife, it's lovely and I do enjoy it, but also I miss being around people. I'm going to do a couple of days a week. I listen to your show all the time, actually.
Fantastic.
I can't lose the first one that I've rang. But I do think as well, I've got to just quickly say, I do think people's approach to parenting has changed a lot through COVID. I think the way people see the family is very different. The idea of me being... I suppose a housewife and a full-time mum, it was frowned upon, it's snubbed, it's seen as, you're just a yummy mummy, you don't want to work.
Right.
I love working, I miss it so much, but you know what I love? I love taking my daughter to school and doing her homework.
That's fascinating. There's another phone in there, actually,
there is.
on that family side of it.
One of my colleagues, Nick Ferrari, did something in the morning about reading a few weeks ago, and that resonated because people do not have time to read with the children because they're working every hour God sends.
Rachel, I could tell that you are missing human company. Because I can't get a word in edgeways, and Sheila Fogarty is ready to start talking to us. So
Isn't she great, though?
You're fantastic, and your kids will be lucky to have you both at home and in the classroom. But I'm flattered that I've become your adult communication outlet. You're my best mate too, and we'll talk again. But I have to crack on now, otherwise I have to give Sheila part of my fee. Yeah. Rachel, you take care. It's just gone 1 o'clock.
Plan.
Here's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien, therapy pair. yet. Who knew? 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 Who knew?
Chào em, hoa cười hương sắc tươi xinh, anh đem cả tâm chân tình chào em. Hoa cười hương sắc tươi xinh, anh đem cả tâm chân tình chào em.